In the last decade, more and more artists have moved away from the idea of art as a personal statement. They are no longer so intimately involved with their materials. They take a detached view. Personal imprint, the mystique of the artist's touch, are deliberately shunned. These artists tend to adopt a professional approach, mapping everything out in advance, like an architect or an engineer. All the vital decisions are taken before the actual process of making the work is begun. For this reason, it hardly matters whether the artist does the work himself or not, any more than for the architect or the industrial designer. Not surprisingly, most of these artists use geometric forms, which lend themselves more easily to this way of working. Works like these are essentially self-contained. There are few direct references to the outside world, although the colours and forms may suggest analogies with real life. One of the first artists to work in this way was Joseph Albers. In his early work, Albers relied on very simple, repeated elements. He often had his work produced mechanically, by sandblasting on glass, or by lithography. These lines are all of 2 thicknesses only, yet create an illusion of depth. Albers was both student and teacher at the Bauhaus. When Hitler closed it down, he went to America. A whole generation of younger artists studied under him. He told his students, do less in order to do more. His own work illustrates the point very well. When you put 2 or more colours side by side, you get a multiplication, not an addition. The whole is more than the sum of the parts. Albers says that colours are like people. Alone they behave like individuals. Together they behave like a social group in a way they interact. Max Bill is another survivor of the Bauhaus. He started off as a silversmith. He's now artist, designer, teacher and theorist. As an architect, he built the design school at Ulm in West Germany. He was its first principal. Max Bill believes that art should draw upon mathematics and science, as it did in the Renaissance. He uses the forms of solid geometry in his sculpture. In England, Victor Passmore was one of the first artists to adopt a professional approach after the war. He changed in the 1950s from a limpid, post-impressionist style via abstract paintings to 3-dimensional constructions. I've taken him as representative of this change in the artist's attitude in Britain. Passmore has been very influential in disseminating this approach through his own example, and also as a teacher in Newcastle. Passmore has himself described what he is seeking to do.
Perhaps the most significant factor about this new approach to painting and sculpture, completely free from natural representation, is the fact that it provides a completely new and more dynamic relationship between the work of art, the artist, and the spectator. In classical naturalism, the spectator was always at a distance from the work. The work was something which operated partly or mostly in his imagination. But in this new approach, the work of art is an actual object, and the spectator can get a new dimension by actually feeling the work, handling it, and if it were large enough, he could get into it.
At Peterlee, Passmore collaborated directly with architects in the design of this new town in County Durham. Robin Denny, like Albers, is preoccupied with relationships of colour, but in his case, relationships of tone rather than of hue. His work is severely geometric, concentrating on a very narrow field of perception. Not only are his paintings geometric, they are extremely rectilinear. He avoids circles and curves. Denny relies for his effects on juxtaposing two different colours of exactly the same intensity, like dark green and brown. Like Albers, Denny works on the principle that less is more, that by restricting the possibilities and alternatives, he can communicate more or more deeply. I talked to Richard Volheim, a professor of philosophy at London University, who has a particular interest in 20th century art.
I think these simplified images have really a kind of latent richness. I think that one rather intriguing way of looking at simplified pictures is to see them as a result actually of a process of simplification, as though there had been some very, very much more complex image on the picture, which had then, in the interests of certain internal demands, been simplified, been whittled down by the artist. I think these simplified images, therefore, are to be seen maybe against certain traditional demands, as though the artist was saying that there's a certain kind of clutter there, which was once required, no longer is needed, and we now wish to remove it. We now wish to purify the image on the canvas.
Instead of emphasizing the flatness of a canvas, Richard Smith builds them out into three-dimensional shapes. Like Denny, he uses a restricted scale of colours and form. In many ways, Smith belongs with pop artists. Both his colours and his forms hint at images from the world of advertising and packaging, the soft, out-of-focus colours of ads in the Sunday supplements, boardings high as houses, the chrome bulges of American cars and jukeboxes, overblown cigarette packets. Richard Smith has experimented quite a lot with the shape of his canvases, trying to get away from the single flat rectangle by making a variety of three-dimensional frames, or sometimes a frame which appears to have lost a corner. Smith calls himself the best stretcher of canvases in Britain. Joe Tilson was originally trained as a carpenter, but now uses quite a number of modern technical processes. More directly than Richard Smith, Tilson draws his imagery from the city environment. A lot of his images are related to pop art. Constantly recurring themes in Tilson's work are lettering and numbering as they appear on hoardings and billboards. Tilson uses stencils and other techniques of the sign painter. I like the way Tilson uses methods evolved by commercial artists. Sometimes he allows these to become the main element in his work, which makes for a certain superficiality. Some critics see this new, more professional approach leading to commercialization. Brian Robertson.
If you have a situation in art in which there's a very greatly increased professionalism, then there's bound to be, I think, a great immediate rising in commercialization. The two things flow out, the one thing flows out from the other very obviously. There are a tremendous number of dealers, there are a very large number of middlemen and officials. There are quite a lot of critics. There are a great many situations that artists can be deployed in from the point of view of travelling exhibitions. All this very much makes a move all the time towards power politics in art, if you like.
David Sylvester shares Brian Robertson's doubts.
Now, there is a tendency in our society to be wedded to the new, to be wedded to the excitement of novelty. And I think at the present moment that there's a tendency, which I think we've got from America, and which I think is a bad tendency, to measure every artist by his last exhibition. You know, so-and-so's no good, look at his last show. The fact he'd had 5 previous shows which were very good doesn't seem to matter. It gets forgotten too quickly. And somehow the snap judgment on what one has just done, this kind of pressure that it puts on is very dangerous, because artists must be allowed to go through bad periods. They must be allowed to do bad work. They must be allowed to get in a mess. They must be allowed to have dud experiments. They must also be allowed to have periods where they repeat themselves in a rather aimless, fruitless way before they can pick up and go on. The kind of attention that they get now, the kind of atmosphere of excitement which attends today the creation of works of art, the way that everything is done too much in the public eye, it's really too much, the pressures are of a kind which are anti-creative.
Well, I want to join this to this, Charlie, exactly in the position it's in. And now I think we should, what do you think we should do? Have a plate under here?
Anthony Caro, whose work and teaching have been very influential recently, one of the first to introduce colour into his sculptures. Sculptors have often used assistants in the past, but nowadays there are occasions when a sculptor has merely designed his work on paper and sent it off to the factory to be built. Even when they make the work themselves, they often use industrial processes, such as an oxyacetylene cutter, as Caro is here, to cut a standard steel girder as a component part for one of his sculptures. For artists like Caro, the actual size of their sculpture is very important. Richard Valheim.
I think that the question of scale always has and always must have an enormous importance in the visual arts, primarily perhaps because of the way in which so many values connected with art, that's to say rationality, proportion, the coherence, the unity of a work of art, derive, I think, ultimately from our conceptions of the human body and its proportions, its form of unity, which we project into the picture. But I think that the question of scale gets a kind of added significance when we have a form of art which is determined to establish that the work of art and the spectator should inhabit a common space. Now, that in turn, I think, can really take 2 forms. It can take one form, which, for instance, we see in the sculptures of Anthony Caro, where the spectator is invited into a kind of space, asked to move around it, but asked to move around it so that he should simply thereby furnish himself with more and more perspectives or points of view onto the object. He should make a whole collection of profiles of the object seen from different positions. Then, however, I think there is another way in which, in certain forms of contemporary art of our day, the spectator is drawn into the space, same space as the object happens, and that is when the objects go excessively, I would say, towards the minimal, so that the object itself offers us very, very little differentiation, almost nothing upon which we can focus our attention. And in place of that, we and the object seem to form part of one and the same kind of drama, is what it really becomes by then. It's one element, we're another, and whatever is provided by the gallery or the museum or the park in which it's exhibited furnish the remaining elements.
For Philip King, Scale is vital. Each painted fiberglass element in this work is carefully placed to create an overall composition. You can walk through it and experience the relationships of parts to the whole, as you might walk around Stonehenge. Whereas Caro, an engineer by training, seems interested in the structural properties of steel, King shows little interest in the texture or natural properties of his materials. Most of his pieces are coloured in such a way that you can't tell what the material is. Camargo is a Brazilian artist who's worked many years in Europe. Like several other South American artists, he's developed and extended the European tradition of geometric and abstract art. Camargo works with more or less standardized elements. A lot of his works are composed of sawn-off circular sections of wood of many sizes. They are painted brilliant white and arranged in a variety of configurations. Light and shadow in the work are constantly changing, an effect which Camargo is consciously exploiting. The whole work is much more subtle and complex than the sum of the standardized parts might suggest. Victor Vasarely is a Hungarian artist working in Paris. He uses standardized parts in a more calculated way than for Camargo. For some years, Vasarely has relied upon 14 basic geometric shapes to make up his compositions. He also restricts his range of colours to 14, taken from the Ostwald standardized colour range. Vasarely imposes these limitations on his work so that it can be produced mechanically by assistants. He wants to get away from the idea of the one-off art object. There are few Vasarely originals in the accepted sense. His approach is in fact closer to that of an engineer or architect than the traditional artist. He merely produces the blueprint. Personal art, Vasarely says, will develop in the direction of social art. Mass production techniques will enable many more people to buy art cheaply. For instance, in this book, Vasarely has redesigned works from all periods of his career so that they are now independent works, expressly tailored for various printing techniques. It contains pullouts you can rearrange into an infinite variety of patterns. Vasarely is credited with being the founder of op art. In fact, his use of dazzling black and white patterns like these goes back to the 1930s. Op art begins, of course, with the zebra. During the First World War, a zoologist suggested dazzle camouflage. British ships were painted in black and white stripes, or strongly contrasting colours, confusing the observers on German U-boats as they peered up through their periscopes. Vasarely started his career as a graphic artist, working in advertising. So did the British artist, Bridget Riley. Like him, she often used optical effects, assaulting the retina and making the eyes swim. She uses a much narrower colour range. Very frequently, her paintings are pure black and white. A strange side effect in some of her black and white paintings is the appearance of a coloured afterimage. It's typical of the professional approach. The artist finds it easy to use assistants, or work as a member of a team. If you're not interested in the personal handprint on the art object, there's no problem about delegating responsibility. The artist may send written instructions to explain how the work is to be put together. He may simply pick up the phone and order a work to be made up from standardized components. This kind of working procedure was anticipated as early as 1922 by the Hungarian artist Mihaly Nagy. He ordered several works from a factory by telephone. All he did was explain to the foreman what he wanted by reference to squares on graph paper and a colour chart. This is a similar sort of gesture to Marcel Duchamp exhibiting standardised ready-made objects like a bottle rack. What matters in this sort of approach is the artist's concept, not the amount of work involved, as Richard Volheim explains.
Now, there is a tendency amongst certain artists, particularly those who derive from Marcel Duchamp, which there are, of course, a sizable number, to adopt a very self-conscious, at the same time highly ironical attitude towards the art of the tradition. For instance, it's quite clearly been a great part of traditional art that a lot of work should go into the making of its objects, that these objects are carefully, slowly, in some cases painfully, literally, built up. Then, at a certain point, the work stops. In other words, the artist decides that the work is finished. Now, what Duchamp saw was the peculiar importance of this last step. As it were, it isn't so much the work as the decision that makes the work of art. He saw the importance of this step, exaggerated it, and said that it alone has importance. In other words, you could isolate the moment of decision and scrap the rest, or get someone else to do it for one.
Artists have now begun to use computers to do their work for them. This is really taking professionalism to the limit. As yet, the results are very rudimentary. But even when more sophisticated machines are invented, they will in no sense replace the artist. They will remain his tool. They will still have to be programmed. This multiple I'm rearranging is by the Chinese artist Li, who works in England. The metal base and these discs, fitted with magnets, are mass-produced. They come in different colours, and you can juggle them to suit yourself. When you can buy works like this at your local supermarket, then perhaps the mystique surrounding art will disappear, and far more people will be able to own and enjoy it. Nearly a century ago, William Morris said, "I don't want art for a few, any more than education for a few, or freedom for a few." The multiple could be the answer to Morris's dream.